That was my anxiety. But how do you stand? Shall you? Will it be a failure? Her steady voice trembling from an unwanted manner. Not a failure. I must give up business, but I pay all men. I might redeem myself. I'm sorely tempted. How? Oh, John, keep up your name. Try all risks for that. How redeem it? By a speculation offered to me, but full of risk. But if successful, placing me high above watermark so that no one ever need know the strait I am in. Still, if it fails. And if it fails, said she, advancing and laying her hand on his arm, her eyes full of eager light. She held her breath to hear the end of his speech. Honest men are ruined by a rogue, said he gloomily. As it stands now, my creditor's money is safe, every farthing of it, but I don't know where to find my own. May it be all gone, and I penniless in this moment. Therefore it is my creditor's money I should risk. But if it succeeded, they need never know. Is it so desperate a speculation? I am sure it is not. He would not thought of it so. If it succeeded, I should be a rich man, and my peace of conscience would be gone. Why? You would have injured no one. No, but I should have run the risk of ruining many for my own paltry aggrandizement. Mother, I have decided. You won't grieve over our leaving this house, shall you, dear mother? No, but to have you other than what you are will break my heart. What can you do? Be always the same John Thornton in whatever circumstances, endeavoring to do right and making great blunders, and then trying to be brave and setting afresh. But it is hard, Mother. I have worked and I have planned. I have discovered new powers in my situation too late, and now all is over. I am too old to begin again with the same heart. It is hard, Mother. He turned away from her and covered his face with his hands. I can't think, said she with a gloomy defiance in her tone, how it comes about. Here is my boy, good son, just man, tender heart, and he fails in all he sets his mind upon. He finds a woman to love, and she cares no more for his affection than if he had been a common man. He labors, and his neighbor comes to naught. Other people grow rich and have their paltry names high and dry above shame. Shame never touched me, said he in a low tone. But she went on. Sometimes I have wondered where justice was gone to, and I don't believe there's a thing in all the world, now that you are come to this, my own John Thornton, though you and I may be beggars together, my own dear son. She fell upon his neck and kissed him through tears. Mother, said he, holding her gently in his arms, Mother who has set me my lot in life, both of good and evil. She shook her head. She would have nothing to do with religion just then. Mother, he went on, seeing she would not speak, I too have been rebellious, but I'm striving to be so no longer. Help me as you helped me when I was a child. Then you said many good words when my father died, and we were sometimes surely short of comforts, which we shall never be now. You said brave, noble, trustful words then, Mother, which I have never forgotten, though they have lain dormant. Speak to me again in the old way, Mother. Do not let us think that the world has too much hardened our hearts. If you would say the old good words, it would make me feel something of the pious simplicity of my childhood. I say them to myself, but they would come differently from you, remembering all the cares and trials you've had to bear. I have had many, said she, sobbing, but none so sore as this. To see you cast down from your rightful place. I could say it for myself, John, but not for you. Not for you. God has seen fit to be so very hard on you. Very. She shook with sobs that came so convulsively when an old person weeps. The silence around her struck her at last, and she quieted herself to listen. No sound. She looked. Her son sat by the table, his arms thrown half across it, his head bent face downwards. Oh, John, she said, and lifted his face up. Such a strange, pallid look of gloom was on it that for a moment it struck her that this look was the forerunner of death. But as rigidity melted out of the countenance, the natural color returned, she saw that he was himself once again. All worldly mortification sank to nothing before the consciousness of the great blessing that he himself and his simple existence was to her. She thanked God for this and this alone, with a fervor that swept away all rebellious feelings from her mind. He did not speak readily, but he went and opened the shutters and let the ruddy light of dawn flood the room. But the wind was in the east. The weather was piercing cold as it had been for weeks. There would be no demand for light summer goods this year. That hope for revival of trade must be utterly given up. It was a great comfort to have this conversation with his mother, and to feel sure that, however they might henceforth keep silence on all the anxieties, they yet understood each other's feelings, and were, if not in harmony, at least in discord with each other, in their way of viewing them. Fanny's husband was vexed at Thornton's refusal to take any share in the speculation in which he had offered to him, and withdrew from any possibility of being supposed able to assist him with ready money, which indeed the speculator needed for his own venture. There was nothing for it at last, but that which Mr. Thornton had dreaded for many weeks. He had to give up the business in which he had been so long engaged with so much honor and success, and look out for subordinate situation. Marlborough Mills and the adjacent dwelling were held under a long lease. They must, if possible, be relet. There was an immediate choice of situations offered to Mr. Thornton. Mr. Hamper would have been only too glad to have secured him as a steady and experienced partner for his son, whom he was setting up with a large capital in a neighboring town. But the young man was half-educated as regarded information, and wholly uneducated as regarded any other responsibility than that of getting money, and brutalized both as to his pleasures and his pains. Mr. Thornton declined having any share in a partnership which would frustrate what few plans he had survived the wreck of his fortunes. He would sooner consent to only be a manager where he could have a certain degree of power beyond the mere money-getting part than to have a fall in with the tyrannical humors of a moneyed partner with whom he felt sure he should quarrel in a few months. So he waited, and stood on one side with profound humility as the news swept through the exchange of the enormous fortune which his brother-in-law had made by his daring speculation. It was a 9 days' wonder. Success brought with it its worldly consequence of extreme admiration. No one was considered so wise and far-seeing as Mr. Watson. End of chapter 50. So, Mr. Thornton has been quite humbled by the state of business nowadays. It's not gone well for him, and doing the unethical thing during the strike panned out really poorly for him. And he has had to contend with that and face the fallout of that. And unfortunately, the steps that he has taken in labor relations, having more of a understanding of the needs of those under him and more of a relationship and a dialogue with those under him, has come too late. The economy has hit a stage where he is not able to recover. And his pride at not taking this risky venture with his brother-in-law that, he ultimately was like, I don't want to use creditors' money on something that I don't know that will it pan out, which he felt was the honorable thing to do on behalf of his creditors. Didn't go very well. He could have earned that money back and then some, but it's looking very much like he is going to have to leave Milton and sell Marlborough Mills. But the one small little glimmer for him is that he now knows that Frederick was indeed the one that he saw with Margaret. She wasn't sneaking out covertly with a lover and behaving unmaidenly in those days. And so he can kind of keep his good opinion of her, I guess, by sort of the rules of etiquette of the day. But now she is far away. She is in London making business decisions, mostly via correspondence. So that is where it's at for now. We have 2 more chapters to read tonight of North and South. A little bit shorter, both of them a little bit shorter than that one. So why don't I'm gonna have another sip of my tea. We'll jump on in. Don't want to keep you guys in suspense for the end too long here. But there's a Pokemon spawn, a Lunatone. You guys feel free to Poke-catch. All right. Let's do it. Chapter 51. Meeting again. Bear up a brave heart. We will be calm and strong. Sure, we can master eyes or cheek or tongue, nor let the smallest telltale sign appear. She ever was and is and will be dear. Rhyming play. It was a hot summer's evening. Edith came into Margaret's bedroom, the first time in her habit, the second ready dressed for dinner. No one was there at first. The next time, Edith found Dixon laying out Margaret's dress on the bed, but no Margaret. Edith remained to fidget about. Oh, Dixon, not those horrid blue flowers in that dead, cold-colored gown. What taste! Wait a minute, and I will bring you some pomegranate blossoms. It's not a dead gold color, ma'am. It's straw color, and blue always goes with straw color. But Edith had brought the brilliant scarlet flowers before Dixon had got half through her remonstrance. Where is Miss Hale? Asked Edith as soon as she had tried on the effect of the garniture. I can't think, she went on pettishly, how my aunt allowed her to get into such rambling habits in Milton. I'm sure I'm always expecting to hear of her having met with something horrible among all those wretched places she pokes herself into. I should never dare to go down to some of those streets without a servant. They're not fit for ladies. Dixon was still huffed about her despised taste, so she replied rather shortly. It's no wonder to my mind when I hear ladies talk about such a deal about ladies, when they're such fearful, delicate, dainty ladies, too. I say it's no wonder to me that there are no longer any saints on earth. Oh, Margaret, here you are. I have been so wanting you. How your cheeks are flushed with heat, poor child. But only think of what that tiresome Henry has done. Really, he exceeds brother-in-law's limits. Just when my party was made up so beautifully, fitted in so precisely for Mr. Coulter's, there's Henry come with an apology, it is true, making use of your name for an excuse, and asking me if he could bring that Mr. Thornton of Milton, your tenant, you know, who's in London about some law business. It will spoil my number quite. I don't mind dinner. I don't want any, said Margaret in a low voice. Dixon can get me a cup of tea here, and I will be in the drawing room by the time you come up. I'll really be glad to lie down. No, that will never do. You look wretchedly white, to be sure, but that is just the heat, and we can't do without you possibly. The flowers a little lower, Dixon. They look a glorious flames, Margaret, in your black hair. You know we plan to talk about Milton to Mr. Coulthurst. Oh, to be sure. And this man comes from Milton. I believe it will be capital after all. Mr. Coulthurst can pump him well on all the subjects in which he's interested, and it'll be great fun to trace out your experiences and this Mr. Thornton's wisdom in Mr. Coulthurst's little speech in the house. Really, I think it is a happy hit of Henry's. I asked him if he was a man one would be ashamed of, and he replied, "Not if you've any sense in you, little sister." So I suppose he's able to sound his H's, which is not a common Darkshire accomplishment, right, Margaret? Mr. Lennox did not say why Mr. Thornton has come to town. Was it law business connected with the property? Asked Margaret in a constrained voice. Oh, no, he's failed or something of the kind. As Henry told you that day, you had such a headache. What was it? There, that's capital, Dixon. Miss Hale does that credit, does she not? I wish I was as tall a queen. But about Mr. Thornton? Oh, I really have such a terrible head for law business. Henry will like nothing better than to tell you all about it. I know the impression he made upon me was that Mr. Thornton is very badly off and a very respectable man, and I'm to be very civil to him, as I do not know how. I came to ask you to help me. And now come down with me and rest on the sofa for a quarter of an hour. The privileged brother-in-law came early, and Margaret, reddening as she spoke, began to ask him the questions she wanted to hear about Mr. Thornton. He came up about this subletting the property, Marlborough Mills, and house and premises adjoining. He is unable to keep it on, and there are deeds and leases to be looked over and agreements to be drawn up. I hope Edith will receive him properly, but she was rather put out, as I could see, by the liberty I had taken in begging for an invitation for him. But I thought you would like to have some attention shown him, and one would be particularly scrupulous in paying every respect to a man who is going down in the world. He had dropped his voice to speak to Margaret, by whom he was sitting, but as he ended, he sprang up and introduced Mr. Thornton, who had at that moment entered, to Edith and Captain Lennox. Margaret looked with an anxious eye at Mr. Thornton while he was thus occupied. It was considerably more than a year since she'd seen him, and events had occurred to change him much in that time. His fine figure bore him above the common height of man, and gave him a distinguished appearance, from the ease of motion which arose out of him and was natural to him. But his face looked older and careworn, yet a noble composure sat upon it, which impressed those who had just been hearing of his changed position, with a sense of inherent dignity and manly strength. He was aware, from the first glance he had given round the room, that Margaret was there. He had seen her intent look of occupation as she listened to Henry Lennox, and he came up to her with the perfectly regulated manner of an old friend. With his first calm words, a vivid color flashed in her cheeks, which never left during the evening. She did not seem to have much to say to him. She disappointed him by the quiet way in which she asked what seemed to him to be the merely necessary questions respecting old acquaintances in Milton. But others came in, more intimate in the house than he, and he fell into the background, where he and Mr. Lennox talked together from time to time. "You think Miss Hale is looking well, don't you?" said Mr. Lennox. "Milton didn't agree with her, I imagine, for when she first came to London, I thought I'd never seen anyone so much changed. Tonight she's looking radiant, but she is much stronger. Last autumn she was fatigued with the walk of a couple miles. On Friday evening we walked to Hampstead and back, yet on Saturday she looked as well as she does now." "We? Who, they two alone?" Mr. Colthurst was a very clever man and a rising member of Parliament. He had a quick eye and a discerning character, and was struck by a remark which Mr. Thornton made at dinner time. He inquired with Edith who that gentleman was, and rather to her surprise, she found from the tone of his "Indeed," that Mr. Thornton of Milton was not such an unknown name to him as she had imagined it would be. Her dinner was going off well. Henry was in good humor, and brought out his dry caustic wit admirably. Mr. Thornton and Mr. Colthurst found one or two mutual subjects of interest, which they could only touch upon then, reserving them for more private after-dinner talk. Margaret looked beautiful in the pomegranate flowers, and as she did lean back in her chair and speak but little, Edith was not annoyed, for the conversation flowed on smoothly without her. Margaret was watching Mr. Thornton's face. He never looked at her so she might study him unobserved and note the changes which even this short time had wrought in him. Only at some unexpected word of Mr. Lennox's, his face flashed out into the old look of intense enjoyment. The merry brightness returned to his eyes, the lips parted to suggest the brilliant smile of former days, and for an instant his glance instinctively sought hers, as if he wanted her sympathy. But when their eyes met, his whole countenance changed. He was grave and anxious once more, and he resolutely avoided even looking near her again during dinner. There were only 2 ladies beside their party, and these were occupied in conversation by her aunt and Edith. When they went up to the drawing room, Margaret languidly employed herself about some work. Presently, the gentlemen came up. Mr. Colthurst and Mr. Thornton in close conversation. Mr. Lennox drew near to Margaret and said in a low voice, "I really think Edith owes me thanks for my contribution to her party. You have no idea what an agreeable, sensible fellow this tenant of yours is. He's been the very man to give Colthurst all the facts he was wanted coaching in. I can't conceive how he managed to mismanage his affairs." "With all his powers and opportunities, you would have succeeded," said Margaret. He did not quite relish the tone in which she spoke, although the words but expressed a thought which had passed through his own mind. As he was silent, he caught a swell in the sound of conversation going on near the fireplace between Mr. Colthurst and Mr. Thornton. "I assure you I heard it spoken of with great interest. Curiosity as to its result, perhaps I should rather say. I heard her name frequently mentioned during my short stay in the neighborhood." Then they lost some words, and when next they could hear Mr. Thornton was speaking. "I have not the elements for popularity. If they spoke of me in that way, they were mistaken. I fall slowly into new projects, and I find it difficult to let myself be known, even by those whom I desire to know, and with whom I would fain have no reserve. Yet, even with all these drawbacks, I felt I was on the right path, and that, starting from a kind of friendship with one, I was becoming acquainted with many. The advantages were mutual. We were both unconsciously and consciously teaching each other." "You say were. I trust you are intending to pursue the same course." "I must stop, Colthurst," said Lennox hastily, and by an abrupt yet apropos question, he turned the current of the conversation so as not to give Mr. Thornton the mortification of acknowledging his want of success and consequent change of position. But soon as the newly started subject had come to a close, Mr. Thornton resumed the conversation just where it had been interrupted, and gave Mr. Colthurst the reply to his inquiry. "I have been unsuccessful in business, and I have to give up my position as master. I am on the lookout for a situation in Milton, where I may meet with employment under someone whom will be willing to let me go along my own way in such matters as these. I can depend upon myself for having no go-ahead theories I would rashly bring into practice. My only wish is to have the opportunity of cultivating some intercourse with the hands beyond the mere cash nexus. But it might be the point Archimedes sought from which to move the earth. To judge the importance attached to it by some of our manufacturers who shake their heads and look grave as soon as I name 1 or 2 experiments I should like to try." "You call them experiments, I notice," said Mr. Colthurst with a delicate increase of respect in his manner. "Because I believe them to be as such. I am not sure of the consequences that may result from them, but I am sure they ought to be tried. I have arrived at the conviction that no mere institutions, however wise and however much they thought have been required to organize and arrange them, they can attach class to class as they should be attached, unless the working out of such institutions bring the individuals of the different classes into actual personal contact. Such intercourse is the very breath of life. A working man can hardly be made to feel and know how much his employer may have labored in his study at plans for the benefit of his work people. A complete plan emerges like a piece of machinery, apparently fitted for every emergency. But the hands accept it as they do machinery, without understanding the intense mental labor and forethought required to bring it to such perfection. But I would take an idea, the working out of which would necessitate personal intercourse. It might not go well at first, but at each hitch interest would be felt by an increasing number of men, and at last its success in working come to be desired by all, as all had borne a part in the formation of the plan. And even then, I am sure it would lose its vitality, cease to be living, as soon as it was no longer carried on by that sort of common interest which invariably makes people find means and ways of seeking out each other, and becoming acquainted with each other's characters and persons, and even tricks of temper and modes of speech. We should understand each other better, and I'll venture to say we should like each other more." "And you think they may prevent recurrence of strike?" "Not at all. My utmost expectation only goes so far as this, that they may render strikes not the better venomous sources of hatred they have hitherto been. A more hopeful man might imagine that a closer and more genial intercourse between classes might do away with strikes altogether. But I'm not a hopeful man. Suddenly, as if a new idea had struck him, he crossed over to where Margaret was sitting and began without preface, if he knew he had been listening to all that paused. Miss Hale, I had a round robin from some of my men. I suspect in Higgins' handwriting, stating their wish to work for me, if I ever was in a position to employ men against my own behalf. That was good, wasn't it? Yes, just right. I am glad of it, said Margaret, looking up straight into his face with her speaking eyes, and dropped them under his eloquent glance. He gazed back at her for a moment as if he did not know exactly what he was about, then sighed, saying, I knew you would like it. He turned away and never spoke to her again until he bid her a formal good night. As Mr. Lennox took his departure, Margaret said with a blush she could not repress, and with some hesitation, Can I speak to you tomorrow? I want your help about something. Certainly, I will come at whatever time you name. You cannot give me greater pleasure than by making me of any use. At 11? Very well. His eye brightened with exultation. How she was learning to depend upon him. It seemed as if any day now might give him certainty without having which he determined never to offer again. End of chapter 41. Oh my goodness, you guys. Lady, thank you so much for the raid. And also, Maiko Seiko, thank you so much for the raid. You guys are amazing. I really, really appreciate you guys bringing your communities over here. I'm blown away, you guys. Thank you so much. Master Pate, welcome in for the Lady Raid. Loving the story so far. Thank you so much. What were you guys reading? Oh, you have to head to bed. I'm so sorry. Thank you, Lady, for coming by. Very much appreciated. And Micah, thank you so much for coming by. What were you guys reading tonight? How was it? You were last reading Debt. Are you still working on that, or have you finished? Have you finished Debt? Have you moved on to a different one? Welcome, Raiders. If you haven't met me before, my name is Snooze. I'm a variety streamer from Canada. We every Tuesday have our classic literature reading streams. Pardon me. We tonight is a very exciting night because we're actually finishing 2 stories tonight. So normally we warm up with a children's story. So we just finished Anne of the Island, which is the 3rd book in the Canadian classic Anne of Green Gables series. And we're just coming up on the final chapter of North and South, which is a story by Elizabeth Gaskell, who worked for some of the same magazines as Charles Dickens. So she has a lot of stories about like class and technology and worker relations. And so North and South is sort of almost like a Pride and Prejudice Industrial Revolution sort of story. Debt never ends, so no. Finished it. We were just diving into real mysteries before we made Mist books next month. Oh my gosh. I was just talking about Mist the other day. You know, I did have Mist, but I also had like some of the kid Mists. I was like slightly too young for Mist when it like first came out. We had it and I like walked around and was like trying to figure everything out, but are you familiar with Spelunks? Do you know that game? Spelunks and the Caves of Mr. Pseudo. So it was this old, like, we had this game on our Macintosh computer. And so it was kind of like a free form, like, you wander around, like some parts are black and white and some parts have color. This kind of gives you an idea of how old it was. And you would find as you went around all these sort of like pseudo like educational games. And there would be like, I think this one, you were like driving a little toaster around and this guy would like drop toast down and you had to try and like not let the toast fall on the ground. This one, you had to do something with the magnet. What was it? Yeah, this was like a little like children's mist, like same developers. But yeah, we had this like this old, gosh, was it on a floppy? It must have been. I have to think. But yeah, that was one of my like, it almost feels like a fever dream because I don't know anyone else that has ever played Spelunks in the Caves of Mr. Pseudo. But it's in the Mist family. Will the toast fall butter side down? Oh my god. And that always happens to me, certainly. Thank you guys so much for dropping in on our Stream Raiders battle. This is a loyalty gold chest, so I hope you get lots of good gold. Let's go take him out. So we're going to be doing our last chapter of North and South here. And then it is tradition in our Halloween reading that we'll usually try and read something a little bit Halloween-y themed. But we always end with a reading of Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven. So we still to come tonight. We have our last chapter of North and South. It's pretty short, and then a reading of The Raven.